that we are so excited to be back here and see so many familiar faces. And some of you have been with us for the whole weekend, so welcome back. And I'm just so aware that this moment this morning is such an opportunity for us to encounter something much larger than what can be contained in an hour. That there's a value and a beauty and the encounter available for us that can be with us forever. And it happens as the Lord starts opening our eyes to the beauty and the meaning that is available in the temporal. And so this morning I want to speak about a very simple concept, but I think it might be a bit shocking and it might be a bit different from what you've heard before, but I want to speak about the God who lost control because he wanted to. Because he has no interest in control. Because he's much more interested in participation than what he is in domination. And, our idea, some of the ideas that we have developed around who God is and what he is like has often been very much focused on omnipotence, the God who has all power, the God that can do anything. But reality kind of confronts us with the shocking discovery that if God is in control, my goodness, we're in trouble. Reality shocks us with the experience that demands that we be converted. There's nothing that converts us like reality. Reality is God's greatest ally in bringing us face to face with truth. And what we find throughout all the scriptures is the stories of people just like you and me, stories of people who's trying to work out who is God and how does he operate. And one of the early stories we develop is a story in which we perceive God as the one who is in control, the one who is absolutely certain. And why did we develop that story? Because we often find our security in the belief that we are in control. We find our security in the belief that we are right. And if we are not completely in control and if we're not completely right, then at least God should be. It gives us a sense of security to believe in a God who's in absolute control. And so many theologies have developed around that idea, even the theology of creation out of nothing, creation ex nihilo, which kind of places God at the beginning before anything exists as the one who commands and all of creation bursts into existence, the one who is the source of all those doctrines developed out of this idea of a God that is the source and in control of everything. And I want to propose this morning a different idea that I think you will see is testified to throughout scriptures as well. And let's start right at the beginning in Genesis 1. I've been meditating on these few verses for a few months now, and they're just opening up greater and greater beauty. Now I'm going to connect that to John 1. And we're going to start discovering a God whose power is much more the power of persuasion than the power of dominance. He's much more the God that invites than the God who manipulates. He is much more interested in setting you free to be fully and truly yourself than what he is to micromanage your every decision and your every move. You see, this idea of God that is one of these. You see, our search for security that leads us to our developing doctrines of certainty meant that we have created a God in our own image, a God of absolute certainty. And maybe I want to throw out one or two abstract thoughts, and then we're going to make it much more concrete in some examples. And I want you to think of these two things: certainty and possibility. And think of them in terms of the future. If we think of your future and what is to come, the events, hello beautiful people, so good to see you, Mark. Hey, come in. So think of these two things, certainty and possibility. And if you think of them in terms of your future or future events, what is to unfold in your future is either a certainty or a possibility. If something is certain, it is no longer a possibility. Okay? And if something is a possibility, by its very definition, it is not a certainty. It is just perhaps. Maybe. It's possible, but the moment the possible, the perhaps, the maybe becomes a certainty, it is no longer a perhaps. It is no longer a maybe. It's no longer a certainty. And what we have done often with our doctrines of God's omnipotence and omniscience, his knowledge of all things, is we have created a God of absolute certainty. Whereas Jesus introduces us to the God of infinite possibility. And those two are not the same. When Jesus says, with my Father, all things are possible. Another way of saying it is, God is the infinite possibility of everything. In other words, God is not the absolute certainty of what is to come. And part of the reason why we've developed such a view of God is because of our philosophic ideas of time and eternity and the conversation that early Christians had with Hellenistic thinkers, which was very productive. But part of that idea was that eternity is something separate from time, that God is in some way outside of time, and it conceived of time as something that already exists from beginning to end. And if God is outside of time, it means that everything is already known to him, every event, every twist and turn. And so, in effect, nothing really surprises God, because if he knows every detail of what is to come, that is what we've defined in many definitions of omniscience as him knowing all things, that he knows every detail, even of what is to come. If that is true, if nothing new ever happens to God or for God, because he sees it all from the very beginning, then God must be so bored. Because, the very definition of boring is nothing new happens. And if nothing new happens for God, that God has no future. That God is just bored. And your relationship with that God is going to get boring very quickly. But we meet a very different God in the person of Jesus Christ. We meet a God who doesn't just stand abstractly outside of time and theoretically observes us, but we meet the God who steps into existence, the God who has always sought existence in our flesh, the God who doesn't want to observe us from a distance, but according to Philippians, he empties himself into human form. He enters this world, this existence, and he comes to demonstrate that he is not that aloof, unmoved mover, but rather he is the most moved mover, the one who enters our existence. And I wanted to tie this up with Genesis 1, because part of that original idea of a God that is separate from creation is the way in which we interpreted Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I've always read that verse, and kind of the thing that I saw is our Milky Way burst into existence, this big bang, and there's galaxies and there's planets. It's God's first act of creation. But when in hermeneutics, the way in which you try to interpret text, one of the first things you try to do is understand what the original authors meant. You might not get it exactly, but at least you'll have an idea of their understanding, their environment. And if you understand what they meant with what they said, you can then not copy-paste it to your existence, but you can translate, if this is what it meant for them, what does it mean for us today? And once you realize that when Genesis 1 verse 1 was written, they had no concept of galaxies. They had no concept of even stars. They didn't know the stars is like the sun. They didn't have a concept even of planet. I mean, this earth was a sphere, it was flat, and there's a dome. Their cosmology is totally different. So whatever they meant, they did not mean the Big Bang the way we imagine it. Okay? They didn't think of that as God's first act of creation in which this whole universe burst into existence. And so one of the earliest scholars of the Hebrew literature, Rishi, he proposed that we translate Genesis 1 verse 1 and 2 as follows. He says, when God began creating the land and the sky, because those are the exact literal translations. So we've said heaven and earth, and we think planets and galaxies, but if we think of how they thought, they, in the midst of their world, they're thinking when God began to create the sky above and land, the earth was void and without form. The Hebrew is so beautiful. It's tahu bavahu. It's like this echo of a chaotic, formless chaos. And it is out of this chaos where God then sends his Spirit to come and vibrate upon the waters. So why is this significant? What he suggests is that Genesis 1 verse 1 is not the announcement of God's first act of creation, but it's the announcement of the subject with which he will be dealing throughout this chapter. And God's first act of creation begins in verse 3, which all Hebrew scholars agree with, that God creates through speaking, through his word, through whispering and inviting. So Genesis 1 verse 1 is not the announcement of God's first act of creation. It's the announcement of the subject that we're dealing with. When God began creating the land and the sky, there was chaos. It was bewildered and astonished, the one translation says it. And it is upon this chaotic waters. Now this is interesting. That chaos is already there. The formless potential, the infinite possibilities is what God begins to work with, to draw it towards the beauty that he can see within it. Now this is very beautiful, because this relates much more to our lives. Because, the big story that we often believed and that we've always interpreted from Genesis is that we began in a perfect paradise where there was no death, nothing. And when somebody made a really bad decision, things went downhill. Jesus came, and hopefully one day we'll get back to that perfect paradise again. And that meta-narrative kind of leaves us here in the middle of a perfect beginning and a hopefully perfect end, and we're trying to connect with it. But if we get back to what Genesis 1, verse 1 and 2 says, it says that God begins this process of creation in your life in the midst of the chaos that is there. I don't know about you, but my life didn't start with perfection. All of us are born and grows up in the chaos of not knowing who we are, where we act, where the story is leading. I think that is the beauty of every newborn child. It is a story untold. Who knows the twists and the turns? And as we grow up, we desperately try and get hold of our story, try and make it more certain, try and narrow the possibilities to something more defined. And if we ever are able to get absolute control of our story, you would have the most boring story ever told. Because the most interesting stories are those with twists and turns that no one expected. A story that only makes sense at the end. When you look back and you see, wow, there's a thin line of meaning that I never saw, that suddenly gives purpose and value to this whole life. So this is something else I want to throw in the mix. In many of the other creation myths, chaos symbolizes evil. And the reason it symbolizes evil is because these myths were often written by the leaders of a new civilization for whom order was equivalent to God. We want order. We don't want chaos. We don't want too much rebellion. Order is divine. Chaos is threatening. But it's quite beautiful how, when this piece was written, most probably during the Babylonian exile, where Israel and Judah finds themselves in exile as slaves, they suddenly start realizing that order is sometimes evil as well. That the act of manipulating and controlling others is a kind of violence that can be evil. And so it's neither order nor chaos that is evil. And so the Genesis narrative actually redeems the concept of chaos to say chaos can be good or evil. God is the one who works together with the potentialities and the infinite possibilities and continually draws it towards greater beauty and greater good. But he's not the one who's just manipulating and controlling everything that happens. So yes, the Genesis 1 verse 1 and 2, when God began creating the land and the sky, the earth was tavu bahavu, which is void, without form. And he sends his spirit to hover upon that water. It's almost a picture of God beginning to impregnate the possibilities of what could be with his desires, with his ideas. And then in verse 3, and God said, let light be, let light come out of darkness. And then he continues to create different spaces in day 1, 2, and 3. And then he draws forth all the plants, all the animals, eventually man out of this. But even the way in which God speaks is not the voice of this manipulative, omnipotent being that just demands fish be, and fish was, but rather it is the voice of invitation where God speaks to his creation and invites his creation to participate with him in bringing forth something new. In other words, even God's most divine characteristic, creator, is not a characteristic that he just withholds to himself, but he shares his creativity with all of creation. And when he wants to make fish, he doesn't just make it on his own in a heavenly aquarium and then just throws them into the sea, but rather he speaks to his creation and he says, see, bring forth fish. Can you hear the whisper of desire rather than the manipulation of the omnipotent one who is desperately trying to be in control of everything? No, this is the God who enters the chaos of our world. This is the God who enters the chaos of your life, which was a revolutionary thought when John wrote, the Word became flesh, especially in their conceptions of a God who was so far removed from our earthly existence that everything material for some of them meant it's evil. And the God who is absolutely good was completely immaterial. Here John introduces us to a new concept of God, a God whose very existence is seen in your existence. A God who continually pours himself out in his infinite generosity into your existence. Now this God willingly is not in control of everything because love does not control. Love you know, we don't associate great leadership with micromanagement. Now, if you have a micromanager who wants to know what you do with every minute of your day, wants to be consulted before you make every decision, we don't normally associate that kind of management with great leadership. Great leadership is the kind of leadership that truly gives you the power to make your own decisions. Even sometimes entrusts you with power that you think is too much for me to handle. But that's what great leadership does. It gives you space to grow. It gives you space to develop. It truly entrusts you. And so often we think of leadership of the person just in front and say, follow me this way, this way. But true leadership is the person, the leader that comes next to you and says, actually, I want you to make the next decision. And I'm just going to back it, whatever way you decide to go. And you might say, no, Lord, I mean, please, you tell me which way to go. I mean, this is why I need your guidance. And sometimes God will just say, nothing. Have you ever had those prayers? You say, oh, God, please just tell me, is it this way or this way? Is this the right decision or this? And silence. No one even gives you a prophecy. There's just nothing. I think that is God's invitation to say, hey, surprise me. Hey, I don't want to be bored. Come on, make a decision. Let's see where you go. And I'm there to back you because I'm the God of infinite possibilities, not absolute certainty. Now, you might say if things are truly possible for God, how and everything is not just certain for God, and that is what I'm suggesting, then how does God's omniscience work? Omniscience means he knows all things. And the way in which we've often interpreted omniscience is he knows the detail of everything that's happened, that's happening, and that will happen. Well, if the future is truly open and not determined, if God has truly given you the ability to participate with him and create the kind of life and the kind of world that he is drawing us towards, then how does it work that God knows all things? Well, it works this way. God knows that there are some things that are indeterminable. God knows all that can be known. And there are certain things, because they are possible and not certain, that cannot yet be known. And so God knows that certain things are indeterminable. And this makes God so exciting. Instead of the kind of omniscience that we've defined before, which, if you really think of it, we've actually created the omniboring God, for whom nothing new ever happens. This is a much more participatory, a much more creative God that says, as he declared in Jesus, I'm the God whose strategy has always been for my thoughts, for my existence, to find flesh in your existence. I want to participate with you in creating a future. I truly give you the power to participate with me and decide where we're going. Decide what's next. Can you sense God's excitement about your life? Doesn't it just open up a whole new world if you discover that God has not and has never been interested in determining and controlling your life or your future. Of course, like any father, he wants the best for you. Of course, he knows where he wants to take you, and he will do what he can to prepare the environment to influence. But he is not the kind of God who manipulates and determines that that is the only possible outcome to your life. Rather, he is the God that continually invites and says, I'm the God with whom all things are possible. I will lead you when I should, but boy, am I excited about giving you the power to decide with me, to create with me, to live with me, and to create the kind of life that I've imagined for you. And so when we come, I'm closing with this, when we come to John 14, where it says the Word became flesh, we speak of that act as the incarnation. It's the Latin word to make flesh, carnate flesh, to incarnate, to become flesh. Suddenly we realize that all of creation is incarnation. All of creation is God continually pouring himself out into our existence. In fact, if you could truly see who and what you are this morning, if you could really, really suddenly be able, when your eyes are opened and you see what is it that makes me me, what you will see is nothing less than the infinite generosity of God, continually pouring himself out into your existence. You are an incarnation. The incarnation continues. You see, creation was never meant to describe an event that happened a long time ago. Creation is the description of a relationship that is ongoing between the Creator and his creature. And even that relationship is intertwined, in which the Creator allows his creation to participate with him in creating. In which the Creator has so intertwined himself with human existence that your life and who you are truly affects God. See, this brings us to another, I don't know if it's even of interest to you, but there's a doctrine called the immutability of God, which basically means God is completely unmoved or untouched, or he is incapable of feeling. Did you know that is a Christian doctrine? Incapable of truly being moved or with feeling, etc., by what we do. That at the essence of God, there is this totally unchangeable, immovable God. Now, unfortunately, again, I want to give two different definitions of immutability. Just like omniscience, you can see a beautiful part of it or a bad part of it. Now, I don't think God is statically unchangeable. I don't think at the heart of God there is a God who, despite you losing your child, despite you, whatever tragedy you go through, he just stays unmoved, unchanged outside you. What we see in Jesus is the kind of God who gets right into the middle of human life. A God who weeps. A God who is touched by the feelings of our infirmity. So think of a fountain that continually, no matter what the weather is, no matter whether it's drought or not, we've been to a fountain like that in South Africa, it just always produces water. Because the water is siphoned through this mountain, through I don't know how many thousands of years, But whether there's a drought for a few years or not, it doesn't affect. This fountain is always flowing. So in a sense, I can say that fountain is unchangeable. It's immovable because it's always flowing. It's constant. Yet, at the very heart of that fountain is not a static, frozen moment of water. At the heart of that mountain is this continual movement of new water flowing. And so if we think of the immutability of God as a fountain like that, at the very core of what makes God God, there is an unchangeable essence, and that essence is love. But love, by its very definition, is the way in which God continually gives himself to others to be affected by them and to affect them, to enter into a true relationship of being intertwined with your life. Are you starting to see the possibilities of a God for whom all things are possible, of a God for whom the future is open? And therefore, a God that is so excited about your life.
Amen. Totally.
He's excited about your life because in your freedom, he finds freedom. In your joy, he finds joy. Every time you love, God is being himself through you. Glory. Thank you, Papa. Wow. What opportunities that open. What possibilities that open. Now that is, I wanted to close off with that thought. I'm just going to take that John 1, just one further thought of that. See, John 1 verse 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things created was created by this Word. In other words, there's nothing that exists except through this Word. And then verse 10 says this very beautiful thing. This Word was in the world. Now, often what we've interpreted the coming of Jesus to be was this God who observed our lives and our world from a distance. And in Jesus, he kind of came and invaded our world to come and put us on the correct path again. But what verse 10 tells us is this Word has always been in the world. This is not a foreign deity that invades our world, but this is the logic of God's love, who has sustained everything in existence from the very beginning. Jesus is not the first person in whom God realizes what it's like to be human. There has never been one human being whom God, that has had one experience, that God has not had that experience with them. Because in him, all things consists. He is the Word that was in the world even before we realized it. Jesus is the first time that we realize that God knows what it's like to be human. And what we've done with the incarnation is we've again made it a symbol with which we include and exclude. We made it this unique event that God became flesh in this one person at one time, whereas God tried to show us that this has been my ambition for every human life. That in your flesh, my thoughts, my dreams can find existence. That in your life, I am being incarnated. Yes. All of creation is incarnation. All of creation is incarnation. This whole universe is God overflowing, the God of infinite possibilities, continually imagining new ways of being himself. Imagined you as the realization of one of those possibilities. And has given you the freedom to so participate with him. To so participate with him and decide how this story unfolds. This takes away a little bit of the security, the illusion of security. If we found our security in the belief that God has written our story from beginning to end and is in control of it, to suddenly realize that God has not completed this story, but he has made you a co-author. And he said, let's see how this story turns out. I'm there to support you. I'm there to cheer you on. I'm there to enjoy the ride with you. I'm even there to experience the consequences of your stupidity with you.
Yes.
Isn't that what the cross in essence shows us? You know, a God that says, I'd rather go to hell than live without you. I'd rather experience your injustice than become the kind of God that you so desperately wanted, who just manipulates and enforces a sense of justice upon humanity. I'm rather the God that says, I'm with the victim. I'm with you in your deepest alienation, but I will never manipulate you. I will just become everything you are. And in that place where you realize that God is the one who's become everything you are, you can hear the whisper of his invitation, because I want you to be everything I am. I want you to experience the joy and the bliss of this moment. You see, this understanding of the future makes this moment so precious. We are no longer living for some imaginary future heaven, a future eternity that's going to deliver us from the torment of this moment. Now, the whole eschatological thinking of a time that has an eventual end, it's so beautiful how the Gospel of John takes that thought and turns it on its head and says that the end of time is actually the fulfillment of that. And that's why in John's Gospel you have no ascension, because what John is trying to tell us is this Jesus did not leave. In fact, in John 14, when he says, I go to prepare a place so that you may be with me where I am. Not with me where I'm going to be, with me where I am. Then he tells us in verse 20 exactly where that place is. In that day you will know that I am in the Father, you are in me, and I'm in you. And my Father and me will come and make our home in you. You are the heaven God desired. You are the moment, the location that he prepared for himself.
Yes, that's right.
And he's so desperate to open your eyes to say, this moment, if you can only see the beauty and the value all around it, you would enter eternity. And you would discover that eternity is not something separate from time. Neither is it a very long time. But eternity is the beauty of the temple. Eternity is when you discover the meaning of this moment. And that meaning, if you've discovered it, continues beyond that moment. Can you see how this whole concept of time is overturned? When you discover a God for whom all things is possible, a God for whom the future is open and not determined, who says the two of us, we are going to discover the value, the meaning of every moment and take that forward into our futures. Mary Ann, can you get ready for another song? Papa, we thank you for this realization that you open our hearts and minds to, Lord. I know even this morning, I pray that our spirits would have caught a glimpse of your heart, of who and what you are, and how you are drawing us into the beauty of who you are. And even though our minds might still be racing to catch up, Lord, we just want to lose ourselves in your embrace. Lose ourselves in this infinite depth of love. Thank you, Papa. Thank you for revealing the eternal value of this moment. Amen.
Beauty beyond compare, floods this earth, you are here, and everywhere your presence dwells, waiting to be seen and held. Life lies sleeping, present in all, though invisible, not to last long. When the silence is gone, beauty awaken.